No one gets up in the morning expecting to face a life-changing injury on the job. But it happens every day in this province, and when it does, it can mean a very long road to recovery before getting back on the job. Joining us now to share his story, Miguel, a skilled industrial worker sidelined 2 years ago with an ankle injury. And Miguel, we welcome you here to TVO.
Thank you.
Just tell us, for starters, what kind of work were you doing?
I was an LP, so I was organizing in the warehouse all the items, what they call it, logistic processor.
Logistics processor.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And how did you injure yourself?
Because I was also a forklift trainer.
Oh, yeah.
I went outside to grab a truck to help somebody else, and when I come out of the truck, I twist my ankle and I broke my ankle.
You broke your ankle?
Yes, that was my first injury.
How long ago did that happen?
That was in 2008.
Excruciating?
Totally, yes. They put me a cast, but I went back to work because it was my leg, not my brain, anyways. So I went back to work, and I keep working until 2010. I have another injury. They put me in another department, a cable department. They're very big cables. There are about 22 pairs in there of cable, and you have to carry on your shoulder to put it through the machine.
And what happened?
One day when I went to the locker, I put my tool belt on my locker, and I heard crack in my shoulder, and that when everything started, all the nightmares started. I couldn't move my arm, and
what happened? Was it a separated shoulder or what?
No, it was a frozen shoulder. It was broken a little bit, and it was frozen. I have tendonitis and bursitis, which is like a crystals created under your shoulders, and it don't allow you to move your arms.
Oh boy. So let's go back to the first injury. After you broke the ankle, did you file a claim with the workplace safety insurance?
But because I went back to work the same week. So
there was no compensation there?
No, it was.
You went right back to work?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, because I didn't mind to work if I even injured, but I don't mind to work. But the problem started after. They sent me back to work after my shoulder was broken. They sent me back to work.
After how long?
Even 2 weeks.
2 weeks later, okay.
Yeah, even the doctor said, be careful with the left arm because he's going to overuse it. Nobody listened to that, and 2 months later, I have a frozen shoulder in my left shoulder.
So you got both shoulders in trouble now?
Yes.
So
the doctors and WSIB declared me as a permanent disability in both shoulders.
So you could not work at all?
No.
And did you get compensated
So they sent me, yes.
Okay. And
they helped me at the beginning. Then they put me on modified work. And the modified work, one of those days, they put a pallet in front of my station, and I twist my ankle again, the same ankle.
Same ankle? Oh, my goodness.
And I have actually 2 surgeries in my ankle already. So I have my shoulders and my ankle.
So you can't work at all now?
Well, according to WSIB, yes. According to the doctors, no. Because I cannot do any repetitive job. But they sent me to do that. And when I complain, they say, no, that is why they accept this, WSIB accept that you should go back to work.
Miguel, how old are you?
I'm 59.
How long have you worked?
I was 11 years old when I started working.
You worked your whole life pretty much?
Yes.
Starting in Argentina, where you're from?
Yes, sir.
And now you can't work anymore?
No. I can do, whatever you see me in there, I can do it. I don't mind doing any kind of job that it won't affect me, my personal life, because the pain is excruciating. Unless you have it, you don't know how painful it is.
Are you on painkillers right now?
Yes, I am. Oxyneon and oxycodone.
What's it like for you not to be able to do the job you want to do?
When I was in 2009, I'm going to tell you a couple things. One, in 2009, I climbed the CN Tower for the United Way in my work. So it was 1,776 steps.
And you went up them all?
I went all of the way up. And I did it for my company. I used to be a bodybuilder. Before I have the accident, to work on the company's cable department, you have to pass a test. So I passed the test with 100%, with no problem. My physical was perfect, but they still say that it probably, according to WSIB, it probably I have the injury before I went to work.
Well, Miguel, your case does raise a lot of questions, which we're going to get into with further guests. So I want to thank you for coming in and sharing your story with us.
No problem.
And you know, best of luck to you. I hope you feel better.
I would like a lot of changes also in WSIB.
We're going to talk about those right now.
Okay.
Muchas gracias, señor.
No, de nada.
All right. Next, we're going to dig into the practice and policy of how injured workers get assistance in Ontario. And while we get our further guests settled in for that, take a look at these numbers. These are from the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. There are 309,000 employers in Ontario who are enrolled in the WSIB. That covers 5.3 million workers in the province of Ontario across 16 different industries. Last year alone, there were 229,000 registered claims, paying out more than $2.5 billion in benefits last year alone. Ontario has long been a pioneer in Canada in terms of helping injured workers, leading the way more than a century ago with the creation of the first provincial body mandated to help those hurt on the job. It was called the Workmen's Compensation Board. That system is now called the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. And joining us now to examine how well it's serving today's workers, we welcome Tom Tehan. He's president and CEO at the WSIB. Meredith Yaknin, staff lawyer, Industrial Accident Victims Group of Ontario Community Legal Clinic. That is a mouthful. Gary Newhouse is here. He's a lawyer who deals with workers' compensation cases. And David Newbury, advocate at the Injured Workers Consultants Community Legal Clinic. Also a bit of a mouth. You two got to work on your titles.
Yeah,
it's a bit too long.
smooth it out.
First of all, thanks everybody for coming in tonight for this discussion. Meredith, we just heard one example of one person's situation being injured and working in this province. How typical is that?
Unfortunately, Steve, Miguel's story is really typical. So what happened to Miguel is he suffered an injury on the job and he was pressured to return to work in a job that wasn't safe, and ultimately he couldn't do it.
Pressured, do you think, by whom?
By the WSIB telling him that he should do it. And then when he couldn't do it, when he tried to keep returning to work after so many years of service, the board said to him, you know, that's your fault. You've decided to not cooperate in your return to work, so you won't get benefits anymore. And they cut his benefits. And as a result, Miguel's been forced to rely, after a lifetime of working, on Ontario Disability Support, on welfare.
So you think the board is the bad guy in this?
I think the board is not listening to Miguel, and it's not listening to Miguel's doctors. And one thing that Miguel didn't mention, but I know that has been a real struggle for him, is the impact of the workplace injury on his mental health and depression and anxiety. And for example...
Oh, hold that thought, because we're going to get to that as we go through. Let me just get sort of a scene setter for everybody here. Gary, how about it? You heard Miguel's story. How typical?
Extremely typical. I've been representing injured workers first as a law student, now as a lawyer for 40 years. And over those 40 years, it's the same story again and again and again. And what's particularly typical, what I found interesting was the first injury happens, he's off a little bit, he goes back to work. And many injured workers have had many, many injuries, but then at some point along the way, they go back, they go back, they go back. And then the last one, breaks the camel's back kind of thing, and now they can't work at all. And usually it's really accumulation of different, like in his case, he's got 2 shoulder problems and an ankle problem. So you end up pretty much a basket case from a physical point of view, and that's very typical.
And emotionally as well, which we'll go into later as well. David, how do you see it?
I mean, I see it as definitely a typical scenario. Particularly, the thing that starts to concern me is when the doctors have come forward and said, we don't think this person is ready to go back to work. We don't think that their health is at such a level that's going to allow that. And that's one thing. I mean, as advocates, we tend to see difficult cases. But one of the things that that got us to put forward the report that I think we're going to talk about today is that a number of healthcare professionals started to come forward and say, we're seeing this all the time as well. And that's when we started, it kind of flagged for us, okay, maybe this isn't just us. Maybe this is a problem that is system-wide and that we need to try to draw some attention to.
Okay. I've obviously left you for last because I wanted you to have a chance to hear all this, and thanks for coming on because you've sort of come into the lion's den a bit here.
This is it's a great opportunity.
Okay, we'll start just very broad-based by telling us what's the WSIB's mission?
The WSIB's mission is to help workers with compensation when they need it, and importantly, to help them in their recovery and return to work. And on that measure, I think that the lead into your show I looked at the last couple of days is, are we meeting our mission? And on the measure of meeting our mission to help workers recover and get back to work, I think we're performing better than we've ever performed.
How do you know that?
Well, today, 92% of workers are back to work without any wage loss within a year. So I think Miguel's case, and I don't know the details, I can't even comment on the details of his specific case, but I think the other folks that are here, they deal with cases like Miguel all the time. What I do know is that 92% of the cases that come into the WSIB, we are getting workers back to work successfully without any wage loss, and that's the important part of our mission. So the really important thing for me as president and for the entire organization is, what do we need to do to work with folks like we have here today to make that result or better for the other 8%? Because that's our focus, and that's what I've talked to these folks about before. How do we address that same and achieve that same success for that other 8%?
Well, let's just pick that number apart. Meredith, 92% by any stretch is a pretty good number. So what's the issue here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on here. The board likes to talk about this 92% number. The first thing is that most people who are injured on the job recover and go back to their normal jobs. So they're not the ones who are the most vulnerable. They're not the workers who are suffering the permanent
You
injuries.
don't quibble with his 92%.
We do quibble with the 92% as well, because we have tried time and again to get a straight answer about whether the WSIB is tracking actual return to work or is tracking whether they enter in their computers, person can return to work, no more loss of earnings. And we have been unable to get a straight answer, and we'd like that answer. We'd like to know what the board is doing. We know, for example, that in the case of workers who are permanently injured and then put through retraining and told they can work, that the board takes no efforts to actually track whether they are back at work. All they track is the fact that they completed the training program and the board said they could find a job.
Okay, hold on there. Is that accurate?
Not accurate. And Meredith knows, in fact, she was in my office with a group of injured workers 3 or 4 weeks ago or a month ago, because I make it a habit of meeting with workers from, workers that Meredith represents, workers that David represents. I've gone to their clinics. It's a true number. It tracks the number of people who are actually back with their employer or with an employer within 12 months working.
So it's not just that you've closed the
It's not
books
just
on
that
them.
we've
You
closed
know
the
they're
books.
back at
I
work.
know they're back at work. I know they're back at work. So what I want to turn this conversation to is, what are we going to do about the other 8%? Because I agree, there's 8% is a lot of workers who aren't achieving the success that we want them to achieve, and that's our responsibility too, no question about that. And Miguel, without getting into the details of his case, there are challenges in some of the toughest cases, and that's what our programs are focused on trying to do, is how do we help those workers achieve the same success that we're achieving otherwise.
Gary, do you have any reason to be suspicious of this 92% number?
Oh, of course.
Well, okay, but why?
Well, I mean, the board's statistics in general tend to be hard to discover. I write a textbook, and part of that involves recording or putting in some figures, and it's harder and harder to get these statistics. And I think there's a reason for that, because, I mean, statistics can always be easily manipulated, but it's better as an organization just to present the ones that you want to present, and then the ones that maybe you have to present. Because when Meredith talks about getting information, they're bringing at her clinic freedom of information requests. It's not just something that's readily available to some normal person who wants to go on the WSIB website and they can see these figures. Those aren't there. So they're buried, and I would suggest that they're buried for a reason. And that's, first point. The second point is 92% is just a kind of meaningless number in the abstract. If you don't really know what percentage of that 92% were people who didn't lose any time at all versus those who have significant permanent impairments. Because the real problem is not with the, no time loss injury. Of course they're back at work. Sometimes they get medical aid, so it counts as a claim, but they're not off. There's no time loss whatsoever. So of course they're back at work. They never left work. They got some first aid, they're done. But the permanently injured worker who can't get back to work, who's off for longer and longer periods of time, it gets harder and harder for that worker to continue to receive LOE benefits.
LOE?
Loss of earnings benefits. In other words, your basic income replacement benefits.
Okay, hold that thought.
Yeah.
I want to give you a chance to speak to that. Go ahead.
So the 92% is a real number in relation to lost time injuries. So Gary mentioned there are certain kinds of cases that are no lost time. So you don't go off work, you don't lose any time, but we pay healthcare benefits because you might need to go see a physio, for example, to continue helping you in your recovery. That 92% doesn't include those cases. And we can debate the 92%. Meredith, I know, doesn't like the 92%, nor does Gary, but I can tell you it's a real number. I guess more importantly, what I want to say is, how do we deal with those that aren't in the 92%? Because I know those are the ones that need our attention.
Let me pick up on that then. The other 8%, let's humor him. Let's take his 92%. What do we do about the other 8% who are in a much more persistent and difficult condition?
I mean, that's an absolutely great question, I think that we need to look at the return to work programs that exist and look at the benefits that those other 8%. I mean, I think there is reason to kind of quibble about that particular number, but obviously we can't spend the hour on it. But we don't know also, for example, what happens to people who return to work and then what happens to them 6 months later. So after whatever box is being checked that Mr. Tien is talking about, 6 months down the road, we don't know if that worker still has a job. We don't know if they have reduced hours. The board doesn't collect information on what's happening to those people after they have returned to work and after that file is closed. And that's a concern that we have as well in terms of being able to accurately reflect the successes of the programs that are out there.
Let me take a look at this from a different angle, and that is, I'm not making any allegations here, and I have nothing but anecdotal evidence, so let's just establish that off the top. Do we assume that there are some people who are either faking injury or who are not as injured as they say in order to not go to work and just get the claim?
Honestly, Steve, I think it's a bit of a red herring in the argument, and I want to make very clear to people listening, I'm not worried about in this discussion that we're trying to, or that we're not focusing on our program of return to work and recovery and it's not set up based on a fear that there's rampant, misuse or fraud by
Maybe
workers.
you're not afraid of it, but businesses, of course, would be because they think their premiums are too high because too many people are getting it when they shouldn't.
Yeah, and we have programs set up that in cases where, we might find certain anomalies in a case, we have ways to deal with those. But that is by no stretch of the imagination the vast majority of cases. The vast majority of workers are just like Miguel. And he said, I want to go back to work. That's why he got back the first time. And, the reality is, the first thing that we hear from most workers when they get injured, and that's why our return to work program is so important, and why our renewed focus on return to work is so important, is when a worker gets injured, one of the first things we hear is the anxiety they feel about how will they ever get back to work and earn a living for their families or for themselves. And so I believe, and the people who work at the WSIB believe, it is our job to help them in their recovery and their return to work as quickly and as safely as we possibly can. Now, do we get it right every time? No. But that is what our program is designed to do.
Meredith, let me just, I know you want to weigh in, but should we be, as outside observers, should we be concerned that there is abuse of the WC system?
I mean, I think the answer is pretty much no, and I appreciate Tom saying that that's the case, because that is the case. There's very little fraud in the system. But I think what is troubling to us and what we see on the ground is that even though workers are not being fraudulent, they are made to feel by the WSIB's policies and practices as if they are intentionally not cooperating, as if they are faking, as if their bodies are broken.
How do you know that?
We know that because we see the cases day to day. So when, for example, a worker who has a back strain at work, and they are expected to recover within 3 months, and the board says, listen, you're going to be better in 3 months. But they don't get better. And they try to return to work, but they can't. And they were before, like Miguel, before the injury, they were climbing the CN Tower. And after the injury, they're just not getting better. And then the board says to them, listen, for one, you're not cooperating in your return to work. You should be back at work. For two, whatever is the reason you're not cooperating in your return to work is because your body was breaking down before your accident. It's because you're old, you're degenerating, and we're sorry, we have to end your claim and close your case. And it makes people feel like a number. It makes people feel stigmatized and like they are being treated like they're fraudulent, even though I know the board's official position is that fraud is low.
Let me give Tom a chance to respond to that.
So slightly different approaches. One is dealing with fraud. The other, though, is we have a responsibility to ensure that the injuries or illnesses that are presented are related to work. That's what the legislation requires us to do, and that's the question we have to ask, not only at the outset of a claim, but throughout the course of a claim. So that is, that's the basic job that our adjudicators, claims managers are required to ask as a claim goes on. And
But the suggestion here is that your people take a rather harsh approach to things.
yeah, and you know what? If someone is taking a harsh approach, that's not the approach we want to take. We don't want anybody to have a bad experience. That's not what we're set up to. We're a service entity. We are there to help injured workers. And as I say, do we get it right every time? No. And that's why when I've met with, certainly Meredith and David, I've said, if there are cases that are challenging, let me know about them. Let us know about them.
And they do?
And they do. Well, sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. David mentioned that report that we may talk about later where certain cases or a report was given to the Ombudsman's office. I've been asking for the cases that they sent to the Ombudsman office for 6 months. I'd love to see them because if there are challenges with some of those cases, maybe we can fix them.
Gary, I'm going to ask you to hold off on a second because I know you wanted to get in on this, but because of what Tom just said, we should talk about this report right now. So Sheldon, let's bring this graphic up. Everybody read along as you will. In September of this year, Dr. Brenda Steinagel filed a lawsuit against her employer and the WSIB, alleging that she was fired by the clinic she worked for at the behest of the WSIB because she refused to change her medical opinion to the one that the board wanted to hear. While her accusations are no doubt shocking to the general public, for injured workers as well as their advocates and healthcare providers, the lawsuit confirms what has long been suspected. The WSIB's inappropriate regulation of medical care is hurting patients with work injuries. Long before Dr. Steinagel came forward with her lawsuit, healthcare workers in this province were raising red flags about the ways in which the province's compensation system treats their patients. Okay, David, you've talked to other health providers as well who were involved in the writing of this report that we've been talking about. What did they tell you?
I mean, the allegations that are leveled by Dr. Steinagel are definitely very serious allegations, and they are something that is working their way through the courts right now, that the courts have decided to have at least enough merit to move to a trial about it. But she's certainly not the only scenario that we raise. She's certainly not the only concern that we have. So, what Dr. Steinagel brought forward is one way that she sees the board devaluing the opinions of doctors and referring to medical consultants and then pressuring those medical consultants to change their opinion. That's one way. We've seen in the press recently a number of doctors who have been fairly substantially criticized for being, hands of the insurance industry who have also been hired by the WSIB to give opinions that ended up overpowering the concerns of workers treating doctors. We see the use of Meredith was touching on some pre-existing conditions policies that exist, where the policy actually states, if you have a non-symptomatic pre-existing condition and then you have an injury, your reward will be reduced because your body was degenerating, as every worker, as everybody does.
Okay, let me stop you there for a second. I want to get, the clock is our enemy here, so I want to make sure we get as much covered as we can. Tom, the suggestion again is that the WSIB puts pressures on doctors to give certain opinions that will save you money and get people back on the job faster or whatever. Your comment.
So the Steinagel case I'm not going to comment on because that is it's a case about a specific individual. The broader question I think that was raised in the submission that David is talking about, the broad report, is that the WSIB, or does the WSIB ignore doctors? And I think the answer to that is no. In fact, when that report was raised, and it was raised by David through the OFL, and we took that very seriously because something like that suggests there's not integrity in the system. And I have said since I became president, we have to have a system that is known for its integrity. We investigated it internally. We had an internal audit. The outcome of it was that in 85% of the cases where we use medical consultants to assist our case managers in making a decision, and we have to do that. Our case managers are not medical experts. So I think people would understand we need to get some medical advice. 85% of the time, our medical consultants agree with the family physician. So there's a small percentage of times when they don't. And it's why I said to you, I'd like to see the cases that David put forward that might fit into that small category, because maybe we can do something about them. Okay. What I will say is, we use the advice of external medical consultants in less than 3% of our cases. So, first of all, it's not a widespread practice, as is suggested, that we are using medical consultants to assist us. In less than 3% of all of our cases in a year do we even use them. So that's the reality of where we are.
Gary, you wanted to follow up.
Well, on that I'm going to follow up, and that is, the use of consultants is a double-edged sword because, if only 3% of the cases are being referred out for opinions, the reality that reflects is that much of the time, and statistically I guess it's 97% of the time, the frontline decision makers are making decisions that are negative without any supportive medical opinion to support that negative position. And there will be, usually on the file, reports from a family doctor. I see this all the time. Or specialists saying, this person can't work, whatever. And then the case manager will look at that and say, well, it's not objective evidence. There's no finding. So the doctor's opinion counts for nothing. And they don't refer it out for an independent assessment because, again, 97% of the time that doesn't get done. So, the consultant problem is a problem in the medical evidence front, but it's only one of the problems.
He says 3% of the cases.
Yeah, well, what about the other 97%, right? It's not like you have to refer a case out every time to a consultant.
I'm surprised I'm hearing that you would like us to use medical consultants more, because the criticism to this point has been you use them too much. You should rely on the evidence of the family physician.
It's a nuance.
And that's quite frankly, in 97% of the time,
hang on,
that's exactly what we do.
It's a nuanced criticism. And part of the criticism is, if you're not going to have any regard for medical evidence at all, at least that's a pretty significant point. And so, yeah, there's one issue of consultant shopping and trying to influence the opinions. That's a problem. But as far as I'm concerned, the more systemic problem is the complete disregard for medical evidence across the board. And in fact, even in the board's own study, sometimes the board doesn't even respect its own consultants' opinions, and I can understand why they might not. But it's just like the Wild West when it comes to medical evidence at the board.
David.
Tom's characterizing the complaint that was brought forward as one that is about medical consultants, and that just isn't true. The concerns that we brought forward are concerns about the ways in which the board treats medical evidence. To their credit, we brought forward 12 or 13 ways that we think that they use to devalue the opinion of a treating medical team, and to their credit, they did study one of them, and that was the use of medical consultants. Like Tom says, it's only used in 3% of cases. Their own numbers, in there, they found that about 1/3 of the cases that they looked at didn't have an opinion from a treating doctor when it was referred to a medical consultant. So that means no one is giving a medical opinion who has met the worker. And in almost 1 in 10 cases, there's no evidence on the file that the decision maker looked at any of the medical evidence. And so, I mean, those are the kind of standards that I don't think we should be satisfied with.
Let me circle back to something you started the program with, and that was a discussion about not just the injury of the body, but the injury of the mind that can often accompany the injury of the body. Excuse me. And to that end, in a study by the Institute for Work and Health, which canvassed workers with musculoskeletal injuries who filed claims with the WSIB, depression is a big issue when having to miss work. And let's just read this excerpt here from the At Work study. About half of the workers in the study frequently felt symptoms of depression at some point in the 12 months following the injury. About 15% reported high levels of depressive symptoms at all 3 interviews. Almost 1 in 10 were diagnosed by a physician with depression during this period. Miguel told us at the beginning of the program how he had to deal with some depression because here's a guy who's worked since he was 11 years old and he can't work now, and it affects his sense of self. Does the WSIB deal adequately around issues of depression and compensating for issues of depression in your view?
So depression and mental illness at the WSIB is in a crisis right now. Miguel's case is just a classic example. It's of what's happening time and again. After he was unable to work, his psychologist wrote to the WSIB and said, listen, Miguel is in crisis. He needs psychological assessment. Please fund it. He is going to get worse if he does not receive counseling and help. And right now, his chronic pain and depression, anxiety make him unable to work. And the board said no. You know, he shouldn't have this mental illness. It's not related to his injury. We're not paying for any treatment. And we met recently with Tom and his senior management team and asked for him to make some simple solution changes to try and right the ship at the WSIB. And one of these was to provide counseling help for workers, psychological treatment. Tell workers how common it is to be depressed after workplace injury. Normalize it. Let them know that they can get help and offer that help.
And
we have received no indication of progress on any of those suggestions.
have you received a no?
Well, not a no, but not a yes.
Have you received a we're looking at it?
Yes, it's one of the things that we've been looking at with Meredith and a number of others. Coming out of the discussions, so I've spent a lot of time, we've spent a lot of time talking about looking at various ways that we can make the system better and improve it. We do cover, Meredith, I think, alluded to it, if a psychological condition emanates from a non-psychological injury, that is an illness or injury that is covered by the WSIB. Now, to my earlier point, there needs to be a connection to the original injury. And sadly, it is very common that happens. It is very common, and that's why return to work is so important, quite frankly. That, the longer a worker stays off work and not able to get back to work, one of the potential outcomes of that is a depression or a psychological mental stress issue, and that would be something that would be covered in the appropriate case.
Gary, is it difficult to determine whether depression is brought on by somebody not being able to work versus maybe they have a predisposition to it, maybe there are other things going on in their lives? I mean, do you have any...
Well, first of all, that's the kind of determination that has to be made by a mental health professional. And second of all, when it's translated into a workers' compensation system, the issue is, did the work injury or the work accident make a significant contribution to the psychological problem? So whether or not the worker had some kind of predisposition, whatever that means, or maybe there's other things going on in their life that might be depressing, if you can point to the work injury as a factor, and that gets, the normal way that gets done is a psychiatrist or a psychologist writes a report and says, well, there were maybe, 3 or 4 factors here, but I can identify based on the history that the significant treatment factor was the work injury. And that's it. It's very simple.
I don't envy any of you. I mean, the fact is we're really trying to find the sweet spot here, the balance, where on the one hand, workers' rights are respected and that if people are genuinely hurt on the job, they are taken care of and got back to work as quickly as possible. We know that that's your interest. Your interest is, of course, trying to keep claims as low as possible, treating workers presumably as humanely as possible, but obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, I should ask. Are you under any pressure from the government of Ontario to keep claims as low as possible? Because if premiums get too high among employers, people aren't going to set up jobs here.
No. When you asked us what is our mission, and you go back to the very foundation of the workers' compensation system when it was set up
100 years ago.
years ago. It was set up as a historic compromise, and people talk about that a lot. What that really means, basically, workers gave up the right to sue, and they were guaranteed a system that provided them benefits when they needed it. It's evolved into how do we provide return to work to assist in that? Return to work didn't exist 102 years ago. And employers agreed to pay premiums into a collective liability system, but at the same time, there was also an understanding that you had to run the system providing stable and fair premiums to employers because otherwise the system would be out of balance. That's, in a sense, the compromise and balance that we have to try and maintain all the time. The reality is right now, we charge employers based on the claims that come in. Thankfully, the number of claims coming into our system every year is going down because I think workplaces are generally safer than they used to be. And that's a good thing. And there's been a huge focus for 25 years on health and safety, and we're seeing the benefits of that now in fewer claims coming in.
Good.
But whatever costs they're driving, we're charging for that now. Unfortunately, we're also charging a significant premium for an unfunded liability that's been around for 50 or more years.
Which is how big now?
It's actually down below $5 billion, but if our premium rate, for example, next year our premium rate will be an average rate of $2.46. $1 of that premium is just for the unfunded liability.
That's $2.46
on average per $100 of payroll.
Per $100 of payroll. Would you okay, Meredith, I get that your mission in life is to represent people who feel aggrieved by this system, and you're looking out for the person who's been injured. Is there a part of you, though, that recognizes that if too many people make a claim on the system, and if the mission is too liberally interpreted, that the premiums that businesses will pay will be too high, and the jobs that actually everybody wants created in the first place won't be created because it will be too onerous to do business in this province? You worry about that at all?
I mean, I don't lose sleep at night, but I think it's an important question because it does concern a lot of people in the country, and it's an important one for us to think about. But the truth on the ground is that premiums are not high. Premiums are very reasonable.
How do you know that? How do you judge that?
Well, I mean, if you look historically at where premiums were in the past, Harris decided to cut them very significantly, and that's the reason.
Premier Mike Harris?
And that's the reason for a lot of the unfunded liability was breaks to employers in their premium rates. And we're seeing that starting to happen again now with breaks to employers this year in their premium rates. But the concern we have is that premiums should be cued to the needs of the system. And when the government in 2010, in response to the Auditor General's report, clearly said that the balancing of the budget of the WSIB would not be on the backs of injured workers. But then, in a speech, David Marshall said that when he took over, the predecessor to Mr. Teahan, he said, when he came to the position, he found quite quickly that the problem was not a revenue problem, it was an expense problem. And that is the approach the WSIB has taken. The WSIB has taken an approach of cutting benefits in any way that they can.
Well, let me ask the converse. Could you raise premiums a little bit?
We don't need to raise premiums. Our premiums, I understand there's the sense that premiums aren't that high. The reality is we have the highest premiums in the country of all workers' compensation systems. There are only 2 workers' compensation systems in the country that have an unfunded liability. Our premium includes $1 just to go to the unfunded liability. The reason we've been able to bring that down over the course of the last 7 years is because we've been putting an extra $1 billion a year of premium revenue back into the system because we've charged more premium for employers. In fact, premiums rates have gone up over the last, between 2010 and 2016, they went up by 8%. The compounding impact of that's been significant over the course of the last 6 years. So we don't need to increase premiums. And I agree with Maris when she says premiums should reflect the cost coming in.
And you think
and
they
we're
do?
charging right now, the new claims, the cost of the premium component we charge in relation to what it will cost for new claims is charged directly back to employers, and that's in our premium.
Okay. Friends, I know we could continue this for much longer, but sadly, that is our time. I know you.
come back.
I was just going to say, we really do need to
just
get you
getting
back
warmed
because
up.
we're just getting warmed up, and I didn't get to half the things I wanted to get to as well. But with that, let me thank Tom Tian, who is the president of the WSIB, and Gary Newhouse, the lawyer who deals with many WC claims. Meredith Yaknin from IAVGO, that is one heck of an acronym there, and David Newberry, Injured Workers Consultants Community Legal Clinic. Thanks to everybody for coming in today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.